Anyway, no, we're jumping into this in Matthew chapter 11, and it kind of, this is sort of, probably the best way to describe this is sort of John's Dear John letter to Jesus. Anyone ever got a Dear John letter? Like someone breaking up with you, or maybe, I know none of you have ever maybe been broken up with, and maybe you were the one that was writing the Dear John letter to break up with somebody else. But in some ways, that's kind of what this letter almost feels like. It almost feels like John is kind of breaking up with Jesus here in terms of the relationship, in terms of how he sees him, who he sees him to be. And so we're just going to kind of read this and then kind of come back and kind of set the context a little bit. But it's in Matthew chapter 11. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to him to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" And Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me. We're going to go pray, and then we're going to unpack this a little bit more. Father God, God, thank you so much we come to this place tonight. And I just pray that, God, you would use this word to challenge us, God. To challenge us. You know, so often we can try to kind of put you in a box of our expectations. Put you in a box of kind of how we expect or how we think you should work and move in our lives. And sometimes we're not careful. When you don't do that, we can kind of find ourselves struggling a little bit. We can find ourselves in sort of that place of doubt where we start to kind of question, God, are you really who you really are, who you say you really are in our life? And my prayer for us is that God, you would embolden our faith. That God, you would challenge us, and you'd also give us the strength to put our faith in who you say you are, not simply who we think or believe or what sometimes want you to be in our life, how we want you to work and move in our lives. And so, Father, we just pray for this. God, I pray you would speak into our hearts, you would challenge us, you would stretch us tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so you got to understand something about John in this situation. You know, John... part of the reason he's writing this, part of the reason he's checking out this, and you got to understand, John, he's a long ways from when we first meet up with John. When we first read John, we read about him a couple weeks ago, and it was at the baptism of Jesus, where he's, Jesus shows up on the scene, and he proclaims to the masses, those around, like, this is the one we've been waiting for. This is the Messiah. This is the one you should follow. And so he was at that place, but when we catch up to him here in Matthew chapter 11, you got to understand, those days probably had to have felt a long way off. Like a shadow of kind of what was. See, you got to understand, between Matthew 11 and Matthew 3, a lot has changed, not just in John's life, but really both of their lives. Jesus, at this point, his ministry is just soaring. His public ministry is an all-time high, while John, on the flip side, his private struggle is starting to wear on him. He's in a place that he didn't expect, a place he didn't think he would be. He didn't think he would find himself in. He's in prison. He's unjustly in prison for sharing the gospel, for talking about Jesus, for challenging Herod, challenging some of the injustices of the time. And so he's in prison, he's on death row, and he's alone. He's no longer preaching to masses, but he's all by himself. Amen. And again, this is no doubt, this is not what John imagined for his life, what he expected his life would come to. And as a result, ever since it's really challenging, it's challenging him on multiple levels. Ever since he chose to acknowledge Jesus as Lord, we now find him sort of challenged in his walk with Jesus, even his belief in Jesus, in context of his circumstances, in context of his struggle, in context of his difficulty. Because how many few things can challenge our faith than when you're going through pain and suffering? Amen. When you're going through difficult, tough times. And yet, one of the reasons I love this passage, though, is that even though John is in this moment of doubt, this season of doubt, even though he's struggling for a moment to really believe in Jesus, even though, listen, get this, even though John's struggling to believe in God, God never stops believing in John. And in fact, actually, he'll go on later in the story, he'll actually go on to talk about how great John is. John, in fact, he actually goes on to say, of those born of a woman, John is actually the greatest, one of the greatest to have ever lived up to this point. And I love that, because sometimes I think when we're struggling with doubt or we got questions, and especially in the midst of pain and suffering, sometimes we can think that almost kind of disqualifies us. Like somehow God doesn't want anything to do, like, whoa, I don't want to deal with your questions, I don't want to deal with your doubt. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Listen, even when you struggle, when you go through seasons where you struggle to believe in God, God never stops believing in you. He never stops pursuing you. He never stops loving you. And so we see this. We see John, he's in the season of doubt, and he's wrestling with it. And so much so, that's actually kind of where we kind of really catch up with the story again. In Matthew 11:2, it says, when John was in prison, again, he's in the situation he didn't expect to be and didn't really want to be. He heard about the deeds of the Messiah. It says he sent his disciples. Now in the Greek, it actually says he sent 2 disciples. And that's significant because, remember back in Matthew 3, and we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that was the last time we actually see 2 disciples with John. And when he's announcing and he's telling everyone, he says, behold, in Matthew 3, the Lamb of God, which behold there means look. This is the one we've been waiting for, we've been looking forward to, we've been looking for. And as a result of his confident declaration, it would actually rub off on these disciples. Those who were following him started to follow Jesus. Even these 2 guys, these 2 disciples who had literally given their lives to following John are now, because of his bold, confident declaration of who Jesus is, are now choosing to follow Jesus. Right? And so he sends them out. This confidence that he had that was contagious. But how many know that just like your confidence can be contagious, so can your confusion? Yes. And that's kind of what we see here. So now he doesn't send people to follow Jesus here in Matthew 11:2. Now he sends 2 people to figure Jesus out. He sends 2 people to sort of interrogate Jesus and to try to find out, are you or aren't you? Or is you or isn't you? Who we thought you were. And listen, by the way, too, part of the reason I share that is that's one of the reasons why it's so important to be in places like this. To be around a community of faith. Because again, confidence and confusion can both be really contagious. Amen. And listen, you're going to go through some seasons of doubt. You're going to go through some seasons, especially when you're in struggles and you're facing pain, you're facing difficulty, and you're facing some things that you just don't understand. It can be so easy to kind of find yourself sort of pulling away from God when, ironically, or it's actually the very seasons you should be pressing into. And if you're not careful, if you don't get yourself in communities of faith, people who can use faith and their confidence is contagious, it can be really tough to make it through. That's part of the reason why we have the church body. We have this community of believers so that way that their confidence or praise would rub off on you. The confidence would be contagious. We need that in our lives. Hey, I'm all for hanging out, watching church online, in my pajamas and drinking coffee, but especially when you're going through tough times, how many know you need a community that's going to speak some faith into your life, into your situation, who's going to remind you that who he is definitely who he says he is. And so here we come to the question. And this is important here because this isn't just semantics how they ask this question. He comes to this place, he sends these 2 disciples out to interrogate Jesus. Are you really who you say you are? But notice what's interesting is how they ask it. It says, are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Now notice it doesn't say, are you the Messiah? It says, are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Now again, not just merely semantics. These are 2 very different questions. Because the question, are you the Messiah, that's pretty black and white. That's pretty much a yes or no answer, right? But how many know, are you the Messiah we've been expecting? There's a little bit more to that question. All right? Like, are you the Messiah we've been expecting? That requires me to know a little bit more behind the scenes. It requires me to know which Messiah exactly are you expecting. But not just that, and before we kind of get into the Messiah that John was expecting, I think it's important that we identify what shapes most of our expectations in life. Because I think we're going to come to discover kind of at the core of some of his confusion, at the core of some of his doubt, at the core of some of his fear, is really this idea of expectations. And so I think it's important that we sort of identify, before we get into John's expectation of the Messiah, what shapes most of our expectations in life, not just as it relates to God, but even life in general. And the first thing in understanding it, one, you got to understand that expectations they're a natural part of life. Like actually, expectations expectations are not just a part of life, they're really a necessary part of life. It's actually what gives you the ability to actually make it through your day. You have this basic expectations about the future. Like in all of us, we have basic expectations that when I wake up or when I go to sleep tonight, the sun is going to set in the west, and when I wake up in the morning, the sun's going to rise in the east. We have a basic expectation that tomorrow, at least my expectation, my hope is that when I wake up in the morning, there'll be breath. I'll actually wake up alive. We have expectation when we flip on a light switch that light's going to come on in the darkness, and we need that. We need basic expectations, just because, again, without it, we would get overwhelmed with life. We would get overwhelmed with life, especially in light of the future, and especially in light of tomorrow. And so, again, we've got these basic expectations of life, whereas human beings, subconsciously and constantly, we are working algorithms of prediction. Which means you're doing math right now. Like, you might not realize you're doing math right now. You might even think you're very good at math, but I'm telling you, you are doing math right now. Like, subconsciously, you're computing different variables to try to predict what the world's going to be like in so many different ways. So, in fact, some of you are trying to figure out and try to predict how long I'm going to preach, right? Yeah, and some of you, and by the way, and why I share that is because this kind of gets to sort of the most prolific or the main variable in the equation of our expectations, which is oftentimes our past experience. So for some of you, your past experience, you've been here before. Most of you have been here before, and so you know that, man, you should get comfortable. Like, I could be talking for a while, right? So settle in. But for some of you, maybe if you're new here, your expectation might be, again, your past experience in church. So for you, again, maybe for you, a 45-minute message, that seems short. Like maybe you grew up like 3-hour church service, where every hour was a new revival, right? I mean, it just kept going, man. The Holy Spirit started moving. For others of you, maybe you grew up Methodist like I did at points in my life, and right now you're expecting actually wrapping up the message right now. You're used to like that little 15-minute thing. So, but again, I share that because again, your past experience is really oftentimes the primary variable to our expectations in life. And by the way, I'm not saying it's the most accurate predictor of sort of our future experience, but it is often the primary predictor. This is the why, for a lot of us, we have this tendency to sort of take the past and push it into the future, especially in relationships, where the person you're with right now, maybe they say something and they're not meaning anything by it, but because the last person you were with, they said the same thing and they were nasty about it, or they left you, or they hurt you, you end up taking what was in your past and you push it into your future and you assume the worst. See, it's an expectation built on previous experience. Previous experience, our past experiences, are the main variable in forming so much of our expectations. Which brings us back to John's question. And the challenge, actually, with John's question in a lot of ways, is, are you the Messiah we've been expecting? Now, Now again, a past experience is a primary variable to my expectations. If you're John, what do you do with God? Because you got to remember, at this point in time, like, when it comes to God, like God had never shown up before in the flesh. Like God never, shown up, born of a virgin, showed up the way He did before. So what do you do when there's no past experience to go off of? And of course, John, he kind of starts off where really is actually a good place to start off when you're going to try to formulate maybe an expectation of who the Messiah is going to be, what He should look like. And he starts with Scripture. The only problem is, though, is that his expectation is built off of just a couple selected Scriptures. Just sort of part of the story. In fact, specifically, as we're going to discover, his expectation of who the Messiah was to be was built off of a couple of verses from Isaiah 5 and Isaiah 33, and we actually read of it in Matthew chapter 3, kind of back in that baptism part of the story when he's proclaiming and announcing the arrival of the Messiah. Notice how he announces this, how he describes the Messiah, sort of his expectations of who he thinks the Messiah should be. And we see this in Matthew 3, verses 10 through 12. It says, "Even now the axe of God's judgment is poised, ready to sever the roots of the trees. Yes, every tree that does not produce good fruit will be chopped down and thrown into the fire." Verse 12, it says, "He is ready to separate the chaff from the wheat with his winnowing fork. Then he will clean up the threshing area, gathering the wheat into his barn, but burning the chaff with never-ending fire." So you see, something you got to understand about John the Baptist, he was the original hellfire and brimstone preacher. Not just hellfire, but you got to throw the brimstone in there. But more than that, this gets to his vision, his expectation of who this Messiah is in his mind supposed to be, what he's supposed to look like, how he's supposed to operate. See, in his mind, he had a vision of the Messiah that was a judging Jesus. A mad, angry Jesus. Ready. The moment you slip up, the moment you make a mistake, man's going to rub it in your face and make you pay. Which, by the way, for some of you, that is your vision of him too. That's what's kept you from coming to church for so long. Man, that's why I was sure. I knew it. I knew that's what Jesus was going to do. See, that was his expectation. See, he had an expectation of a Messiah that was like Chuck Norris Messiah. Like Chuck Norris, like this Messiah that was going to come in, and he was going to, come in with explosions and like that. We may even have a picture. I don't know if we do. Yeah, we have a picture. Yeah. I can't prove this, but in my mind, when he was sharing these verses, that was the picture he had in his mind. He was going to judge some people that needed to be judged. He was going to make those who did wrong, man, he's going to make them pay. And angry and mad. There's going to be explosions. And yet, here's where the rub started to come in. See, because what do you do when your expectation is that this Messiah is going to come in as the Lion of Judah, but he shows up as the Lamb of God? What do you do with this, kind of tension between your expectations of how you think God should work and the reality of how God actually does work? Like when God is blessing some people, you think you should be judging. When God is showing grace to some people, you think should be condemned. Yeah. What do you do with that? And for John, he's got these expectations that are blinding him to the reality of who Jesus is. Which, by the way, expectations always do that in a relationship. Yes. In fact, I remember when my wife and I were first married, and I grew up. You got to understand, I grew up in a home where we would go and we would eat dinner. And my mom was an amazing cook, and she would make these amazing dinners and set the table and always looked really pretty and really beautiful. And we'd come in and we'd eat dinner, all of us guys, And then when we were done, we just like left our plates there and we went and plopped on the couch. I mean, and that's just what we did. My mom she just took care of everything. She just took care of it. She took care of the dishes. She took care of all that. That was my experience. Again, talk about how past experience can form our expectations. But then I got married to Holly, and I mean, my expectations were not the same as her expectations. Like I can still remember one of the first nights I just kind of like, up and left the table and went and plopped on the couch. I remember like, what are you thinking? Like, I'm not your mom here. Like, all right, well, clearly. But again, expectations. And the problem with that is again, when we have these expectations, it can blind us to the greatness, we blind us to the blessings of the other person. In my relationship with Holly, some of you are like, man, not only is she a great wife, like she's a saint for doing what she does with you, but in that especially those first couple of years with these expectations, I was having a hard time seeing that. And she was having a hard time seeing that in me. I'm sure there was more than a few times she's like, why did I marry this guy? But again, expectations, they can blind us to the reality of the greatness of a person, the reality of who a person is in our lives. And certainly that's what's happening here in John's case when it comes to Jesus. He's got all these expectations of how he thinks God should work, how he thinks God should move, how he thinks God should show up in his life. And when God doesn't show up the way he thinks he should, we have this tension. We have this disappointment. We have this doubt. In fact, truth, I would say that a lot of our doubt, a lot of our disappointment, especially when it comes with God, is again, back to the expectations. And by the way, I get some of the pushback. Somebody like, man, can you even say that? Disappointed with God? Like or discouraged or down in God? Like, can I say that in church? The truth is, yeah, you're going to go through some seasons where you are disappointed, even with God. Because the reality is that, again, our doubts, our disappointments are connected oftentimes to our expectations. And the reason I say that, why you're going to have some seasons where you're disappointed with God is because we serve a God who doesn't just work within our expectations, but a God who works beyond our expectations. And in fact, truth is that if God just always did what you expected him to do, he would never be able to go beyond what we expect him to do, what his word actually reminds us of the very character of him, which is a God who does more than we could hope, more than we could ever imagine, more than we could ever conceive, right? Yeah. Like, again, there's going to come points where you're going to feel disappointment, maybe even doubt when it comes to God because of what you do, again, with this thing of expectations. And by the way, too, just a little side note, too, if you're like, man, I'm struggling with this whole idea of feeling disappointed with Jesus at times, like, I don't know about that. You know what, if that's you, that just means you've never shown up to an Easter drama before. Speaking of Jesus showing up in ways maybe you don't expect, I remember, and I've shared this before, one of the Easter dramas I did, there was one time I was a youth pastor, and I was recruited to play the role of Jesus. And I remember walking up, and he gets to kind of the climax where they put me on the cross, and they're going to lift me up, and it's supposed to be the real highlight, the big climax point of the crucifixion. Well, as they start lifting me up, the cross breaks. Oh. And so the Roman soldiers, they start saying words that I'm pretty sure is not in the biblical account of the story. And so eventually they just kind of like lifting me up, and one guy's holding the cross, looks like an X, and I'm a crisis laugher. I don't know if anyone else is, but man, I start snickering. I was trying to play it off kind of like it was tears, but you talk about times where you're maybe disappointed with how Jesus showed up. That would have been one of them. Hey, by the way, too, though, I realized I was the only one when it comes to Easter dramas and sometimes disappointed with how Jesus shows up. I've discovered that my stories are not isolated. In fact, I came across this video of an Easter drama kind of gone awry. Why don't you take a look? where Jesus doesn't show up the way you expect him to show up. And as a result, sometimes this can create some real, like John, discouragement or create some disappointment. In fact, it's why actually later on in this passage, Jesus would go on to say, there at the very end, he says, man, blessed is who doesn't see me as a stumbling block. Now what he's referring to there is not so much in relation to who he is, but in relation to who we tend to think he is. How we think he should show up. What we think he should do. How we think he should work in our lives. He's speaking to this idea of expectations. And I love his response, actually, in Matthew 11 to John. Because in a lot of ways, it's not that he actually, he doesn't tell John to lower his expectations, but actually challenges him to raise his expectations. To kind of raise his expectations beyond the box, beyond what's predictable, beyond what he thinks how he kind of thinks he can kind of shape and mold God to be. To think beyond the box when it comes to God, think beyond the expected. And I love how he does this. He does this in verse 4 of Matthew 11. It says, Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor." Now, interesting enough, this is actually a reference to much like John had kind of built this expectation and really sort of a very partial, very limited view of who the Messiah was going to be. Interesting enough, Jesus also kind of speaks and he pulls from Isaiah. In fact, it's this verse in Isaiah 61 and Luke chapter 4 where he says this very same thing. In fact, he uses this to sort of announce his arrival on the scene. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he's anointing me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Now, you'll notice in there, you don't see any chopping or burning or any of that stuff, right? Any of the stuff that John would have really expected. But when he's referring to this, in fact, actually, interesting enough, when he's referring to, he actually includes when his account, when he's telling John, kind of who he is, what he's done, trying to expand John's expectations. Basically, he includes some things, I don't know if you caught that, in Matthew 11, his Matthew 11 account, that actually aren't even on the Luke 4:18 kind of statement. It's like, hey, as a matter of fact, I didn't even say I would heal lepers, but I did it, right? When he's talking about this prophecy that he fulfilled, this messianic prophecy, I didn't say that there were those who were deaf who could hear, but I did it, right? I didn't say I would raise the dead, but I did it. In other words, I'm not what you expected. I'm so much more, John. See, something you got to understand about our God is that oftentimes I've found that God doesn't always live up to your expectations, but he always lives up to his word.
Amen.
He always lives up to his word.
Amen.
John, I know you've got this ideal of how you think I should work, or maybe how others have told you I should work and move, but the reality is that who I am who I say I am is really who I am. And when you look at his word, he might not always live up to your expectations. He might not always move and work in the way you expect or predict, but he's always faithful to his word. This word that reminds us of a God. He says, listen, I work beyond what you can hope, what you can even imagine, what you could even predict in your life. A God that works beyond simply our expectations. And so in this, he's really trying to challenge John to again expand his expectation of not just who God is, of who Jesus is, but to also expand his expectation for his own life. See, what's interesting in this kind of prophecy that Jesus is sharing and kind of commenting on how he's fulfilled it is, I don't know if you caught this, but there's one section he left out of it. And the section that he left out of it, ironically enough, it's probably the section that John most wanted to hear in life, was to set the oppressed free. To let the captives go. Remember, John's in prison. John's in a situation he doesn't want to be. And see, what John wanted to hear was, hey, John wanted to hear was that, hey, I'm coming. Guns blazing. I'm going to Chuck Norris this thing. And I'm going to let you escape from life. Escape from life. Which, by the way, is a lot of our wants in life. A lot of our expectations. A lot of our expectations isn't so much what God wants for us, but it's what we want for our life. And what we want for our life is we want to escape life a lot of times. Especially we live in a culture that's all about the escape. So we'll escape through Facebook, we'll escape 12-hour TV binges, we'll escape to our favorite TV show, we even escape to work to avoid and escape the problems, the challenges, escape the struggle, escape the brokenness. Again, it's these kind of low expectations of life. We think the goal of life is simply to avoid problems, to avoid challenges, to avoid difficulty. And in fact, for some of us, speaking of things that kind of led us maybe to seasons of doubt where we struggle, hey, is this Christianity thing even really working? Or am I doing it right? Is because we had an expectation that, man, when I give my life to Jesus, all of a sudden everything's going to be rainbows and sunshine and unicorns, right? I'm not going to have any problems. But listen, Jesus didn't come so we could just simply escape life. Yeah, in fact, and we actually see this actually in his response, because he'd actually go on to sit there and talk about and steer the conversation, not just talking about who he's done or who he is and what he's done as the Messiah, but he'd actually go on to talk about John and how great John is. In other words, John, I know what you want to hear, but here's what you need to hear. Here's what you need to hear is that struggle, that difficulty, I know that right now it doesn't look like it makes much sense. Right now, you don't see how this could be, serve any good purpose in your life or in the life of somebody else. But I'm telling you that your struggle, because of your willingness, because of your willingness to push through some challenges, your willingness to hold on to faith, your willingness to stay faithful to the cause. Listen, the lame are walking, the blind are able to see, like things are happening, things are working, things are moving. Again, he's trying to get John to see is that I know that right now you feel like you're in a place where you're questioning, man, is this all there is? You're questioning, man, did what I do, was it even worth it? Did it even make a difference? Because see, something you got to understand too is, again, we always want wants. We want the escape. We want to live the comfortable, the easy life. But how many know you can get what you want and that not necessarily be what you need? Amen. Like, I want that man. Or I want that job. I want that promotion. And then you get the man, you get the promotion, you get the bigger house, and it's still not meet what you need. And in fact, the Bible actually, when it talks about how God works, and again, this God who works beyond our expectation, works beyond simply our boxes of the predictable. Oftentimes, in the Bible actually speaks of a God who says meets all of our needs. Meets all of our needs. And I used to always really struggle with this. I used to almost kind of think this passage was a little bit of a cop-out. Almost like, okay, when Jesus doesn't work the way I expect him to work, he doesn't show up the way I expect him to show up, and it's almost like, well, he at least met my need. I'm alive, I got bread on the table, like the bare minimum. Yet the truth is, it's actually just the opposite. What he's saying is that, hey, you live in this world where it's just constantly, man, what I want. But listen, what I want for your life is ultimately what you need. And listen, one of the things we need most in our lives is that sense of significance. That sense that I didn't just go through life and not make it any type of impact. I didn't just go through life and nothing happened as a result of it. Like there was some value to this. There was some value to the struggle. There was some value to the pain. There was some value through the hardship. And that's kind of that's basically what Jesus is getting at. Is, listen, I want you to know that, man, there's value there. In fact, when I went to the University of Oklahoma, I was a psychology major simply by title. I hardly ever showed up to class, but I do remember showing up one time, And it just happened to be the day they were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And of course, on it was all these needs, safety, security. But at the very top of it is this need transcendence. And against this need that we've all got that our life would matter. It would have some significance. And there would be something that we could do that extends beyond just ourselves. And that's ultimately what Jesus is getting at. Listen, I know you've got an expectation. Your expectation is, man, I want to escape. Just want to get away from the problems. But listen, what I want for you is so much more. What I got planned for you is so much more. And I know you can't see it. I know it doesn't always make sense. But listen, I'm up to something. But it's beyond your expectations, beyond what you could predict. I want to show you a story, and it's a little bit longer video clip than we normally show. But I want to show it to you, and then afterwards I'll come up and we'll wrap up this message. But take a look.
I was about 10 or 12 years old. Middle of the day, God gives me a very vivid picture of a little kid, and I'm holding her, swinging around in my parents' yard, and she's just laughing like crazy. In the picture that I had in my mind, she had dark skin and dark eyes, and God said, "This is going to be your daughter, and her name is going to be Chloe."
Walt and I grew up together. I think he moved to town the year I was born, so we've known each other my whole life. When I was 10, we moved right across the pasture from him, so we grew up together. My whole life, I was like, I think Walt Manus is amazing, and I always thought when I grow up, I want to find someone just like him. I went to university about 30 minutes from where he was living, and when I went, he just kind of came in and helped get me settled and helped introduce me to a church. And so we just started spending more and more time together, and we were sitting in his car just talking, and we had this conversation about what our dreams and our hopes were for the future. And I said that I felt like God had just made me to be a mom. That's what I wanted. More than anything, I wanted to be a mother. And I said that I had actually a name picked out already that I wanted to name my daughter, and he said, "I do too."
And I was like, "Well, what's the name?" And she said, "Chloe."
And he's like, "You've got to be kidding me." In the picture, Chloe always had olive skin, so he always thought he would marry a woman with olive skin.
She can't have a brown-eyed child. I didn't know what to do with it.
I think we both knew pretty early on that we were going to get married. Walt felt like home to me, like from the very beginning. I felt like, yeah, this is where I belong with this guy. When we first got married, we decided we wanted to wait a little while to have children, and then at a certain point we realized, no, this is the right time. We want to start pursuing having children, and months turned into years, and pretty soon we were 4 years into trying and still nothing.
I had always clung to this promise that God had given me about the daughter, so I didn't know when it was going to happen, but it was starting to get hard to wait.
It was really hard. It was really, I don't know, I think I struggled with questioning God's goodness in that time, because I just felt like it was so mean, like such a mean thing to do. Yeah, sorry.
And every time that we would hear about someone getting pregnant, we would just be devastated because we were thinking, this isn't going to happen for us. We're just fools. We're fools who want kids, and it's never going to happen.
And then I would say somewhere, I feel like God shifted something in me so significant. There was a point where I started to realize, actually, no, I can live like a really full and really happy life, and like experience so much with God and know Him so deeply and be satisfied in the deepest way a human can be satisfied, even without having a child. It sounds like a simple concept, but for me that was a big change, a big shift in my perspective.
Annie is like, well, maybe we're supposed to adopt, and I was adamantly against it. I had this thought of like, I don't want, I called it a Band-Aid baby. We are struggling, we are hurting, and I didn't want just a fix. I didn't want just some kid. I wanted the kid that we were supposed to have, And God just like, He progressed me from like being adamantly against adoption to be like, I just want the kid that God wants. Maybe it's not supposed to come through biological means. Maybe it's supposed to be through adoption. So what do you think?
I think that I'm very excited to adopt, but waiting will be hard.
I remember one night we were at Walt's sister's house and I was checking my email and there was an email that came in and it said, "It's a girl." I clicked on it and I realized it was from the adoption agency and they said, "We just wanted to let you know that a birth mother has chosen you guys and yeah, you're going to be parents." And I was like, I just sat there looking at the email like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this.
She'll be born in late February or early March.
Coming close.
And we're working on her name right now.
We're working on it. The name Chloe is completely off the table. We've abandoned it.
We had decided, oh, that was just a fluke thing. That was a coincidence that we both liked that name, you know. That was nothing. And so we had even talked about a different name. And the social worker working with us, she says, "Okay, well, the birth mother would like to meet you before she has the baby." And we were like, "Yes, we want to meet her. Sounds great." And so we went to the house where she was living and we knocked on the door. And
she opens the door, and it looks like a grown-up version of this little girl in my head that was from the past. And what in the world, you know? The social worker says, "Now let's talk about a name. Have you thought of a name?"
she said, "Yeah, well, ever since I got pregnant, even before I knew it was a girl, I've been calling this baby Chloe."
We were just floored.
And both Walt and I mean, I don't even remember what we did exactly. I just know that I was ugly crying.
All those doubts were just completely out of the window, and it felt like I just had full body shivers. It was like the Holy Spirit was just right there.
This is so much a God thing that's going on right now. You've been planned for a long time. Before you were even conceived, we knew your name. And I think we know what you're going to look like. I don't know, but we'll see.
This surreal presence of God was just all around us, and I felt him saying to me, "See how much I love you? I've been writing this story for years, since Walt was a kid. I've been writing this story," and I realized how foolish I was, I guess, like how my perspective was just so skewed in my own pain, that what I saw as him not loving me was in fact him being the most loving he could have been.
Day of.
Yeah, I was just crazy nervous that morning. I remember going to the hospital and then all of a sudden it was happening. All of a sudden the doctor came in and was like, "Okay, she's ready and you're gonna have a baby now." And I don't know, there was just all this movement and bustling around, and then Chloe was there.
Good girl. How you doing?
I'm good, I'm really good.
Yeah. So many years of anticipating her as a child. She's here, you know? She's been a part of my life for so long, and she's finally here.
I remember just holding her and looking at her face and being like, "I'm your mom, I'm your mom."
There was no mistake. I am the father of this child, just like God had always planned it to be. And I'm just amazed at what God has done. It's a constant struggle to just sit in His sovereignty. And when everything is falling apart in your mind, just to wait.
And there were so many people that got to celebrate with us. I can't even count the number of people who came and said that they had prayed for us, or that they had waited for this baby with us, or that our story had somehow spoken to them. This wasn't just about me and Walt and this baby, and it was about all these people that God wanted to touch and encourage and bless through this story.
He just doesn't leave anything to chance. It's not random, and it's amazing. It's a miracle.
That's a picture of our God right there. That's who our God is. And listen, it can be tough. I get it when life isn't working out the way we expect. God isn't showing up and moving and working the way we expect or we think He should show up. One of my favorite verses is Ephesians 2, where it talks about, "For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works." One translation says, "We are His masterpiece." And I love that. I grew up in an artist home. My mom was always painting, and she would paint these masterpiece type paintings, and these really detailed oil paintings that would take literally several years to actually do. But what always struck me about the process was just how messy it was. Like it was a messy process. Like she'd get done and she'd have paint all over, there'd be paint all on the floor. And listen, I share that because when it comes to this masterpiece of what God is doing, one, you can count on the fact that God is not just doing and working behind the scenes, working beyond simply your expectations, but the process of it, why it's sometimes hard to see that is in the messiness of it. And the messiness of it, sometimes we can just kind of get this partial view of the picture, and we can assume that the partial view of the messiness is ultimately the picture itself. And my encouragement to you, and really just my challenge to you tonight is will you have the courage to not allow your expectations of who you think you should be, how you think you should show up, be a stumbling block that keeps you from ultimately stepping in and seeing the masterpiece, seeing what he's really forming, really what he's putting together. In other words, is your faith in who he says he is, or is your faith in who you think he should be? And that's two very different things. Who you expect him to be, who you think he should be, how you think he should show up, or how he says he is. A God who says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard what I prepared for those who love the Lord. God's up to something. You might not be able to see it, it might not be able to make a lot of sense to you, but he's forming a masterpiece. He's doing something amazing in and through your life. I want to pray for you.